Welcome to Bridges. I'm Monica Schmelter, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. Today, my guest is Bishop Christopher Johnson. And Bishop, it's so good to have you.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm glad to have you. This is a special edition of Bridges that we're starting to do now, where we really focus on stories and churches and ministries that are right here in Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Please tell us about the church that you pastor.
Yeah, so I pastor Zion Christian Ministries. It's in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And we're excited about how God is blessing us there. And we've been there 13 years now.
Wow.
So we're working on 14.
Wow.
And the church started in my wife and I's living room.
Wow.
Just 13 years ago. And so that has been a whole journey in and of itself. But we're just so thankful that God has blessed us and placed us in Murfreesboro.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about the church and what it's like.
Yeah, so, well, the church is a young, vibrant, energetic ministry, if I can describe it that way, where we have liberal worship, a practical word, and we're just a real down-to-earth, relevant ministry. And it started, our whole journey, our whole process started in a theater on the campus of MTSU. Then we moved from there. We went into a funeral home. I know, right? You know.
So people came to a funeral home for church?
People came to a funeral home, and it was one of those things where we had 2 months of worship experiences in the theater. And we had to get off of campus. And so one of the ladies that was coming to the ministry said, well, you know, I work at a funeral home and our chapel is available.
I don't know why I think that's so funny.
It is definitely funny. God has a sense of humor.
He does.
And what happened, we went into this funeral home and we were only supposed to be in there about 2 months, and it turned into 6 years.
No.
And we stayed in that funeral home, Helam's funeral home, who she also has a funeral home here in Lebanon.
Yeah.
But she let us come in, and she was such a blessing. Wendy Helam was such a blessing. And we stayed there in that funeral home for 6 years, in a place associated with death. People were finding life.
Amen.
And when we were inviting people, you can imagine some of my commercials, right? You know, Jesus did some of his best work in dead situations. And so people were coming and lives were being changed. And our church grew.
They grew in a funeral
home.
You know, because I'm just thinking, you want to come to church with me on Sunday? Yeah, where is it? Well, we meet in a funeral home.
And it was so interesting because we were, you know, little did people know, but, you know, there were caskets in the next room and, you know, and, you know, but God was doing great work.
Yes.
And before long, people really didn't pay attention to the fact that it was a funeral home. And so, but we grew. And then in 2014, we were able to purchase our property that we're currently worshiping in, and that's 4750 John Bragg Highway. And then just last year, we were able to build classroom space and multi-purpose areas for our youth. And so it's been a process, and it's been a journey. So we started with about 11 people in our living room, and now we're well over 600.
That's amazing.
Right there in Murfreesboro. And so it's been great to see how God has worked.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said, Bishop, like it's been a process, because I think that that's typically how God works.
Yes.
He doesn't have to work that way, but even in the creation story, I see a process. You know, you see day 1, day 2. He could just rain manna down from heaven all of the time, right? But typically it's that process of work. And for us in our growing up as a believer in Christ, it's a process. It's a journey. I would love to know how you came to faith in Christ.
Well, it's so exciting when I talk about it. I came to Murfreesboro in 1999 on full football scholarship at MTSU. And there I served and served and served on campus in some of our campus ministry or student organizations. And I believe I was really, until about 20 years old, I was really just kind of riding off mom and dad's faith. You know, I'm a PK, and I kind of just I remembered the Jesus that mom and dad worshiped. But it got real to me one night, my sophomore year. I'm in a Bible study in one of our dorm rooms with one of my greatest friends, and the Holy Spirit we were reading Philippians, and I remember it like it was yesterday, and it was Philippians 1 verse 6. And Paul says, I'm confident in this one thing, that he has begun a work in you. And it was at that moment, it's like it became real that God was really working in me. And at that moment, my sophomore year in college, and I grew up in church all my life at that point, and my sophomore year in college is when I really got saved for real. Because that work that God began to do, it was in me. And it wasn't mama's Jesus, it wasn't dad's Jesus. He became my Jesus at that moment. And it became real to me, and I really gave my life to Christ for real that time.
And that has to happen for all of us.
Yes.
There has to be that moment of faith where it's not just what we give mental assent to, or like for you, being a pastor's kid, what your parents told you, but where we really accept Christ and commit our life to him on our own, not just because it's the thing to do. But now you're about 20 years old, right?
I was about 20 years old.
Okay. So did you tell your mom and dad I just got saved, or how did they?
I did. I told my mom my whole story, and I told her, I really feel like this was different. I really feel like now there's something real. And then my mom, she got real deep on me. She said, well, your name, she said, you were the only one. I'm the baby of our family. And she said, you were the only one that didn't, have a name leading up to me getting ready to give birth. So it was like last minute. It was like last minute. We were like, okay, just Chris, right? And then she said, upon studying, I realized that your name, in the Latin means to carry Christ. And she said, I think, son, now it's time for you to live up to your name. And so that became like my mantra, really, for the rest of my time there at MTSU, was I have to live up to my name. And so I started then not only just going to those organizations, but I started leading Bible studies. And I started leading campus ministries. And Coach Andy McCullum, who was the head coach of our football team, he made me the team chaplain while I was on the team.
Wow.
And so you can imagine this, my teammates are calling me Rev. And not only are they calling me Rev, but, they were kind of monitoring their conversations when I came in the room. Hey, don't say anything. Here comes Rev. So I thought that was real big for me, that I would have that amount of respect.
Absolutely.
And I knew I had to live before them that life. And so that level of accountability kind of really forced me to say, okay, there's a lot more people counting on me to do right.
Right.
And so that kind of helped. And I still serve as the team chaplain for the MTSU football team.
Oh, that's amazing. And started when you were a student there.
Yes.
On scholarship.
Yes.
And so it didn't bother you then when teammates kind of restricted their conversation around you?
It did not. I thought it was awesome. I thought
it is.
maybe this is, maybe I'm going to be the example, and maybe I'm the only church that many of them will get. And so it was so bad that when I would try to go to parties, they would take me home. It's like, man, young kid, let's get Rev out of here. And so that was a blessing at the same time, but I felt the responsibility of, these guys are really looking up to me. And to this day, those same guys still call me and thank me for living that lifestyle.
Yeah, I think of, Bishop, that verse that talks about that we're to walk worthy of the vocation.
Yes.
And I think sometimes in my own life, I'll look at my life and I'll think, God entrusted me with a lot. And am I really walking worthy? Like, am I really appreciating this? Am I living up to who he is in me? Or am I relying on my own strength? And I think for all of us, it's a process.
Yes.
It's a journey. There are those moments where I get reminded of, oh boy, this is so much bigger than me, and I need to be responsible and accountable because I love Jesus.
Yes. Yes.
and not let it get more complicated, with the weights of the world and the responsibilities. And so now, you're a bishop and you have this location there in Murfreesboro. Does the responsibility get to you ever?
Well, I believe the responsibility is different. First of all, I wouldn't trade the process. I wouldn't trade the empty nights. I wouldn't trade preaching in front of 3 people. I wouldn't trade losing friends. I wouldn't trade any of the heartaches, the tears I had to shed. I wouldn't trade any of it because I believe that it is the process that grooms you for the promise. David, I think about that story. Samuel anoints him as king, and then he leaves and goes to Ramah. He leaves him there anointed as the king, but he cannot have his kingdom yet. He has to spend more time in his backyard of his father's house. That's the process.
Yeah.
And so now what makes me appreciate what's happening now is I remember. I remember when we didn't have the building. I remember the funeral home. I remember, the house and the theater. And so now what has happened is you're more appreciative. And there's still this sense of, God, do I deserve this? Am I worthy of this? And so Zion Christian Ministries has been a joy to pastor. I was just talking to a couple of pastor friends the other day, and I'm listening to all of these horror stories and listening to all of these things that they're going through. And I have to honestly say, Zion has been a joy for me.
Praise
and my
God.
wife and I, we cannot honestly say that there's been a great deal of horror stories.
That's awesome.
God has blessed us tremendously.
That's wonderful. We've got to take a break. We want you to stay with us. When we come back here today on Bridges, we're going to continue hearing Bishop Johnson's story and what God is doing right there in his church in Murfreesboro.
Don't miss another episode of Bridges. Subscribe to our YouTube channel today, where you can find all of Monica's latest teachings and interviews. It's easy to do. Just visit youtube.com, search Monica Schmelter, and click subscribe. Once you are subscribed, click the bell icon to get notified when a new episode is available to view. Thanks for watching Bridges.
Join the Bridges community on Facebook. Visit Facebook and search for Bridges with Monica. We would love to connect with you.
For more information on a guest, visit our website, ctntv.org.
If you're just joining us today on Bridges, I am talking with Bishop Christopher Johnson, and he pastors the church here in the Murfreesboro area, and we've been talking about his life, his faith, all of that good stuff. And Bishop, we were talking about, the church and just what a joy that it's been. I know that God has also given you some books to write to help people. Let's hear about that.
So to rewind a little bit, I wrote a book, one of my most proud moments. My dad, who left me in 2012, went on to be with the Lord, was a great man. And before he was a pastor, he was a great man and a great father.
Amen.
And so I really, really cherish those moments. And one of the things, the inspiration for this book that I've written on manhood, called Man-Made Men. One of the inspirations for that book was, I remember when my dad died, I had all kinds of people sending prayers and scriptures, and in moments like that, those things help.
Absolutely.
But I think what hit me the most and what helped me the most, I had a friend who texted me and said, "Hey, I know in times like this, people are sending you prayers and scriptures, but I want to tell you, you had 32 years of your life with your dad." And he said, "I never knew mine." And that hit me. And I'm like, man, there's so many lessons my dad taught me. Here's a guy who's my age who never had that in his life. And so that helped me to get up and quit feeling sorry for myself and say, okay, well, now the responsibility is on me. I have sons that I have to instill these values in. And so I wrote a book, taking all of the lessons my dad taught me to help other men impact and influence other young men, called Man-Made Men. And so it's really a guide to making other men. And so that was one of the books that was really, really an inspiration for me, because today's society, I see it so many times. young men just have no examples.
They don't. They don't.
Of
And,
manhood.
there are so many women and moms, and I commend every last one of them that are doing it mostly or all by themselves.
Yes.
And yet at the same time, we know that there's only so much that she can do because she's not a man. I mean, I'm not a man. I wouldn't know. Right? You need a man to help another young boy grow
Yes.
up to be a man. We need that. So you're saying you took all of those, the lessons, the
Yes.
32 years that you got to live with your dad and his lessons, and
Yes.
put that into written form
Yes.
so that people can replicate that.
And so the book is a guidebook. So what it's really set up to do and designed to do is to take the model that we have, my brother and I, and help other men discover their manhood models. For example, one chapter in the book talks about absolutes. So absolutes it's a thing that my dad, he would always say, you gotta have some absolutes, son. You gotta have some things in your life that you absolutely will not do. See, oftentimes we talk about, as individuals, we talk about what we want to do, and we talk about what we will do. But very few people have really settled in their spirits.
That's right.
That this is what I'm absolutely not going to do. And so those absolutes are those things that I'm saying I will not do. I will not be unfaithful to my wife.
Amen.
I will not bring shame to my family. I will not. And that's what those absolutes are. And so what we're doing is, in the book, I'm not telling you that as a man you have to do these things. What I want to help you do is discover what your absolutes are.
To formulate your own
That's it.
absolutes.
That's
Because
it.
I think you're right. There is power to us looking at our lives and saying, that is not going to be me.
Right.
Like, I am not going to go there. And then those put in those boundaries, because it's like, now we already know I'm not going to do that.
Yes.
So I'm not even going over that. That's not a temptation. It's not a thought. It's already been, I've already committed to that. So I can
Yes.
see how that would be really, really helpful.
Yes, and you said a key word. You said boundaries. So I'm just going to use that as an intro to my next book that I've written. I wrote another book called A Life of Boundaries. This whole idea of limitless living. It hit me one day thinking about how stretched I was in my life, trying to be a pastor, be a husband, be a daddy, be someone else's counselor, and be someone else's mentor, and trying to be everywhere at the same time. And eventually I had to start drawing some boundaries in my life, because I realized I can't be everything to everyone.
Nor are you supposed to be, or am I supposed to be? Like, it's just not a healthy idea.
It's really not. And for years, everyone has been, we've always heard things like, the sky is the limit. Or we've always heard things like, you could do anything you want to do.
Right.
And that's been ingrained in us. And there's nothing wrong with that ideology. The only problem is, sooner or later you discover that just because I can do a thing,
That's right.
doesn't mean I should.
No.
And
No.
the idea that we're going to do everything is just simply not true.
Because it's exhausting.
It really is.
It's exhausting.
Yes.
And God didn't intend for us to live lives that are exhausted. And I think, we can put that on ourselves by saying these things. The sky's the limit. You can do anything that you want to do. And there's, like, I get what you're saying. There's some truth to that. It's
Yes.
like, but we do have to pick and choose, like you said, with your
Most definitely.
absolutes, with things in our lives of, this world has so much, but I can't do it all.
Right.
No matter how many years God gives me here on earth, I'm not going to be able to do all of that
That's right.
all of the time. Like, that kind of thinking really burns a person out and
Yes.
is exhausting. So I'm glad you wrote a book about that.
Yeah, and the thing of it is that when we really discover intentionally what it is God has put us on this planet to do. I think Mark Twain was right when he says the two most important days of any man's life is when he's born and then when he finds out why. So I think as you look at that, if I can really hone in on why I'm here, my purpose for living, why God has gifted me a certain way, why he has put me in certain geographical locations, and I can hone in and focus on that, then I won't get so caught up in all of the other things. There's a concept in my coaching that I call no wasted motion. We're not wasting time and energy on things that really don't matter.
Right.
And I think sometimes people go through life, just kind of wasting time.
Well, yeah, and not understanding purpose in terms of, there are just certain things that just are not for us to do. You know, I know, for example, that even though being an accountant is a really awesome thing,
Yes.
I'm just not good at accounting.
Yes.
Right? So that would be such a waste of mental thought and motion in my life because I don't have a penchant for it. Like even when
Yes.
I tried to study and tried to get better, I might have seen some improvement, but not enough that I would want to be a CPA. Nobody would want to pay me to do that.
Right, right.
So I just need to leave that alone for other people who are gifted in that
Yes.
way. And so once that comes off my table, I can think about these other things
Most
that,
definitely.
that God has for me. And I think that that's really smart for parents to teach their kids.
Yes.
Sure, there might be some weaknesses that we can strengthen up, but we don't want to make our weaknesses the things that we think about all the time.
That's it. And you know, what I've seen is so many pastors, so many ministry leaders fall into that trap, thinking that, you know, you can do everything or that you're gifted in
Yeah.
every area. And that's just simply not the case, which leads me to another work that I've, another book that I've written, and it's my latest book called Pastor Plus. And so Pastor Plus is this concept that pastors have to start thinking about those two questions in their lives that's really going to be a reality, and that is what next and what else. Because I watched my dad at a late in his career as a pastor, late in his ministry, really not want to pastor, but just had nothing else to do.
Right.
And so
Right.
Pastor Plus is this idea that pastors can impact the world with something beyond pulpit ministry.
Absolutely.
You know, and so everyone Jesus called, all of his disciples were in the marketplace.
Yes.
And so he knew that he was going to use something as Peter's fishing company. He was going to use something out of his fishing business to do ministry. You know, most of the time we see Jesus in the text, he's asleep on a boat.
That's right.
Right? He's teaching from a boat.
That's right.
And he's using Peter's boat, which was something he used to do business with.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was so interesting. You know, even the word redemption is a marketplace term. It means to buy back.
That's right.
So God uses these lessons to show us that there are some things, there's a place where ministry and marketplace can meet, that pastors have some skills that can create extra streams of income so that they're not tied to the pulpit forever.
Yes. And also so that you can have a wider perspective.
Yes.
And I don't mean this in any negative fashion than just the pulpit, because that's not at all what I mean.
Right.
But if you're just doing that and that's your only perspective, you don't really know what it's like for the people that are sitting there listening to you, the kind of work that they do,
Yes.
40 hours, if not more a week in laundry. And I'm certainly not saying pastors don't work, because I know
Right.
they do. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's just the more relatable that we are,
Most definitely.
the more that we know what people go through, it helps us be more effective. I really believe that's part of why Jesus was a carpenter.
Most definitely.
Right? Why would God have bothered for that to be a part of his life if it wasn't significant in some way?
Yes, and Paul mended tents.
Yes.
You know, I mean, so
Yes.
that's in it. And hopefully, if there's a pastor watching who's like really just starting in ministry,
Yeah.
or a young preacher who's coming out of seminary and just getting started, I would really encourage, you know, them to just find something else
Yes.
that they're growing with, because that reality is definitely going to set in. And then when you're in church and serving in ministry because you have to,
Right.
it becomes a sort of bondage.
Well, it's the worst ever, right?
Yes. It's a sort of bondage because you can't do anything else. And now you're going out of obligation instead of the pureness of your heart. And so with the whole concept of Pastor Plus, that's what we're trying to do, is show pastors that you have transferable skills.
Yes.
You have value in other places besides just the pulpit, that you can go in and impact the world, and people would really value and honor the gift that's in you.
Yeah, and not just that marketplace skill, but such a different avenue in which also to share your faith and the
Yes.
gospel, and to be
Yes.
received in a totally different way, because people expect that from a pastor.
Most definitely.
But they don't, you know,
Yes.
from a businessman or from a businesswoman. They don't expect that. So those are some really good thoughts. Thank you so much, Bishop, for coming
been
and
a
for
pleasure.
joining me today. It's
Thank
been
you.
so good to have you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Stay tuned. Monica will be right back. Prayer changes things. If you need prayer, call 615-754-0039 or email prayer@ctntv.org.
Log on to www.ctntv.org, where you can make a prayer request, view our program guide, see who's on Bridges, or even watch one of Monica's latest teachings. Log on to www.ctntv.org.
One of the things that we talked about today on Bridges was the word process. And for most of us, we don't usually appreciate the process. We live in a culture, sometimes even the church itself really embraces results, that we plan for results, we pray for results, we work for results. And while it is important to see results, it is just as important to understand that most of the time, God works in our lives in and through a process, much like He did even in creation. There was day one and tasks, day two and certain tasks. God could have spoken all into existence in just a moment. He chooses to work through a process, and in our lives, and in our faith, and in our vocations, He typically works through a process also. So if you're at a place in your life and you're like, I just want to be done with the process, I'm ready to see results. Well, I feel that way about some areas of my life too, but I've learned and am still learning that sometimes I just have to wait. I have to work the process. I have to trust the creator of the process, that He is delighting in my details, and because He's no respecter of persons, He will delight in your details. And while what you're praying for may not seem to be coming soon enough, wait and allow His process to work in and through your heart, to work in and through your life. And then, as we've trusted Him through the process and praised Him and enjoyed the process, there will come a point that we will see the results, that we will have that time of rejoicing and celebration. So wait on God. He's worth it. We are out of time. We say goodbye, and God bless you.